Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles, consulting hypnotist and life coach, and welcome to Saturday at 2:30. Every Saturday afternoon at 2:30 Central Time, I make a 10-minute video blog here on YouTube and then later edit it and post it on my YouTube channel. I touch upon different themes related to life coaching, spirituality, and hypnotism. Today, I'm going to be focusing on something that concerns spirituality. I'm going to be talking about the 7 deadly sins. Now, I'm in favor of sins. Now, to understand that, you need to realize the context is I'm a clergyman. I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister in full and final ministerial fellowship. I'm what's called a community minister, which means although I'm resident at a congregation of my denomination, they authorize me to work beyond the walls of that church with the larger community, and that's what my practice of medical hypnotism is all about. I'm also credentialed as a board-certified chaplain with a specialty in the mind-body arts. The work I do is similar to what most other consulting hypnotists do, but I do a lot of it for free. We have a large charitable component to our work here because it is a ministry. So in addition to the section that is paid, we have stuff that we give away. So like any member of the clergy, I'm in favor of sin because it's really good for business. If people didn't sin, I'd be out of a job, you know. One poet, I think it was Auden, although I could be mistaken, said, "I love committing sins and God loves forgiving them. Truly the world is wonderfully arranged." Now, more seriously, I'm not in favor of sinfulness as such. But I want to explore as a philosopher, and I have 2 degrees in philosophy, what the whole concept of sin means and the 7 deadly sins in particular. Now, first, if you want to know what they are, there's a simple acronym to remember the names of the 7 deadly sins. Peg's Law, P-E-G-S-L-A-W, Peg's Law. Pride, envy, gluttony, sloth, lust, avarice, and wrath. Pride, envy, gluttony, sloth, lust, avarice, and wrath, the 7 deadly sins. Now, sometimes people will ask me, well, where in the Bible can I read about these? And the answer is that nowhere in the Bible can you read about these. The 7 deadly sins are not contained in the Bible. They arose out of the work of what's called in religious history the Desert Fathers. In the first century of the Christian church, a number of, I believe, mostly male, although I think there were some desert mothers in this mix too. These were people who became like monks and friars, often connected to a monastery, but they withdrew to be hermits living in the desert, largely in caves. It was a dry climate. Caves were okay to live in. And they pursued writing, they pursued spiritual direction, and lived on charity, usually, and donations from their spiritual directees. One of these desert fathers was a guy by the name of Egregius the Solitary. And he's the person who came up with the core notion of the 7 deadly sins. And Egregius lived, he died in about the year 400 Common Era. He thought that there were 7 to 8 thoughts that everyone needed to kind of wrestle with and overcome if you were going to be living a moral and good life. His teaching got picked up into the Roman Catholic confessional tradition, and priests in seminaries were taught to look for these 7 deadly sins because they were good for business. Most people committed some form of them, and they were really good ways of hooking people into the confessional process. Then Chaucer, when he wrote Canterbury's Tales, incorporated them into Canterbury's Tales. And then Dante, when he wrote the Divine Comedy, included the 7 deadly sins in the Purgatorio, the book about purgatory. And in that book, there was a mountain of the mountain of purgatory, and people were progressing up it from the bottom after death, from the bottom to the top. And when they cleared the top, they entered the paradise, heaven. Uh, so for Dante, the sins actually had a hierarchical order, least offensive to most offensive. The least of the seven deadly sins was lust, because at least that was an embracing of life. And after lust came gluttony, a more forgivable, not as forgivable as lust, but forgivable sin. Then greed, then sloth, which is laziness, and then the three major sins that were at the bottom of the mountain of purgatory: wrath, anger, envy, wanting to take what others have earned and have a rightful ownership of, and finally pride, because that was the sin of Satan, who said to God, "I would rather reign in hell than be ruled in heaven. Non serviam, I will not serve." There were some other sins popular in antiquity, acedia, which is kind of uncaring, and the other one, which was being vainglory, kind of an unjustified pride in yourself. But the seven deadly sins were the big ones that got caught up into Western culture and into a lot of secular writing as well. Basically, these seven deadly sins, pride, envy, gluttony, sloth, lust, avarice, and wrath, were considered blameworthy behaviors because they were self-indulgent to the point of self-destruction. You see, the seven deadly sins are all exaggerated versions of normal and healthy desires. I mean, everyone has a healthy need to experience an attraction to a sexual partner. Everyone likes food. There's no one who doesn't like food, or at least very few people. People want to possess things. This is normal and healthy, and these behaviors are praiseworthy and appropriate if kept within bounds. And that is the core of my message today. Normal and healthy human behaviors become the seven deadly sins, indulgence to the point of self-injury, when they're not kept within bounds. Now, this concept is an old one. It's Buddha's middle way, and you find it in the Western tradition in the writings of the philosopher Aristotle in ancient Greece and his Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about what he calls the golden mean. That is between two extremes. There is always a middle way, and that is where virtue lies. And Aristotle's Ethics is all about the acquisition of virtue, not don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's not a list of things to avoid, but it's how do you become a better version of yourself by cultivating virtue. So, for example, let's take lust. Now, the unhealthy extreme of that would be an unhealthy and destructive sexual relationship, promiscuity, rape, that sort of thing, versus the other extreme, which would be celibacy. Now, I'm not sure celibacy is a sin, but I think the testimony of the Roman Church these days is that it doesn't work out really well. But between those two extremes, you have the middle way, the golden mean, which would be a healthy, consensual sexuality. And that is where the virtue of human sexuality would lie. And this is true of all of these sins. Now, most of you are not members of the clergy, although some of you are. I go to a minister's meeting, when I look around at my older colleagues, I see a bunch of fat people. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Very commonly, ministers struggle in mid and later life with issues of not just being overweight, but obesity, and even morbid obesity. I've seen colleagues show up at conferences that have to be on crutches or ride around in little carts because they've grown so big, their ankles are collapsing. Now, excessive food consumption, gluttony, is really a bad deal. It's definitely a sin. It's self-destructive. And we see that with overweight people. The other extreme would be equally bad, anorexia, a person who has an adverse relationship to food and so restricts their intake of food, they put themselves at danger of death. The middle way would be a healthy appreciation of food. Now, I'm an ex-chef. I'm a very serious foodie. I set a wonderful table here at our home. I run a scratch organic kitchen. I'm very proud of the cooking that I do, but I try to cleave to that middle way. Not so overboard that I'm bankrupting the budget with excessive restaurant fees, yet certainly not so restrictive that I put my health in danger by being thinner than I should be, or shortage of meaningful nutrients. So between those two extremes, there is the golden mean, and that's where virtue lies. This is true of all of the 7 deadly sins. They are exaggerated and self-destructive versions of things that it's reasonable to love within bounds. And so Dante actually would call the 7 deadly sins a disordered love. That is, it wasn't kept within bounds. It wasn't kept within limits. Healthy boundaries were not observed. And the counsel of the 7 deadly sins and the whole notion out of Aristotelian ethics, strive for virtue, which is almost always going to be the golden mean between the extremes, so that the things you love wholeheartedly, but in an ordered way, not a self-destructive way. Which leads me to my definition of indulgence, and I'm a fan of indulgence. All things in moderation that are healthy and good. All things in moderation that are healthy and good, because there are some things that are not good at all, whether in moderation or not. I mean, there's no such thing as good murder, but those things that are healthy and good, strive for, experiment, check it out and see, taste and see if it's good, but in moderation. You don't go to either extreme. You stay on the path of the golden mean, the path of virtue, and you avoid the 7 deadly sins and probably some other ones that we haven't thought of yet. Hey, thank you very much for your time and attention today. I appreciate it. I'll be back next week at 2:30 next Saturday with another topic, and I hope you'll tune in. If you're watching this on Facebook, please like and share. If you're watching it on my YouTube channel, please subscribe, and also feel free to share as well and to like. Thank you much for your attention. If I can be help to you, please feel free to reach out. Stay well and stay safe.